Most horror stories offer you a deal. You agree to be scared, and in exchange, you get to survive. The monster is defeated. The credits roll. You close the book and go back to your life. But what happens when a horror novel refuses to honor that deal? What happens when the evil isn't supernatural, the house isn't haunted, when the only monster is a stressed woman on an ordinary corner of an ordinary street, and the real horror is that everyone around her looked away? That's what Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door is, and once you read it, it will not let you go. Before we go any further, and I mean this more sincerely than I've meant a content warning on this channel, please take care of yourself. This video discusses severe child abuse, sexual violence, torture, and murder. These are not fictional constructs we're examining safely from a distance. This is the story of a real girl. Her name was Sylvia Likens. She was born in 1949. She was murdered in Indianapolis in 1965. She was 16 years old. The book is based on her case. Please, if this is not something you can engage with today, it's okay to stop here. We will still be here. Sylvia Likens and her younger sister Jenny were left in the care of a woman named Gertrude Banality by their parents, who worked a traveling carnival. Over 3 months in the summer and fall of 1965, Sylvia was subjected to escalating abuse and torture, not just by Gertrude, but by Gertrude's children Paula and John, and by neighborhood teenagers including Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs. The cruelty grew. Neighbors suspected. Children watched. Adults looked away. Sylvia died on October 26, 1965. She liked to roller skate. She wanted to be a model. She deserved to grow up. Say her name, Sylvia Likens. Jack Ketchum, the pen name of novelist Dallas Mayer, heard about the Likens case and couldn't shake it. He published The Girl Next Door in 1989, 24 years after Sylvia's death. In interviews, Ketchum said he wrote it because he couldn't understand how an entire community could let something like this happen. He didn't write it to horrify you for entertainment. He wrote it to drag you inside the psychology of bystanders, to make you feel what it costs to look away and what it costs everyone else when you do. Here's the literary question worth sitting with. In most horror novels, we identify with the victim or with the hero who tries to stop the evil. Ketchum makes a radically different and deeply uncomfortable choice. Our point of view character is the bystander, a teenage boy named David who lives next door, who sees what's happening, who feels horror, and who does almost nothing. Ketchum forces us to inhabit that paralysis rather than the suffering, and that is an act of moral engineering disguised as fiction. Think about what this choice actually does to you as a reader. You are not outside the story looking in at evil. You are inside David's head, decent, horrified, frozen, and Ketchum keeps returning the same quiet, devastating question, why didn't you do something? David is, in ways that are genuinely hard to sit with all of us. Ordinary, capable of recognizing wrong, and somehow still choosing the path of least resistance, the comfort of not getting involved, the social cost of speaking up. In 1963, philosopher Hannah Arendt covered the trial of Adolf Eichmann and coined a phrase that changed how we talk about evil, the banality of evil. Her devastating observation was that great atrocity doesn't require monsters. It requires ordinary people following ordinary social pressure, step by small step. The Girl Next Door dramatizes this at the scale of a single house on a single street. Gertrude Banality wasn't a creature from the dark. She was a sick, stressed woman that a community failed to intervene on and then failed to check. That is the actual horror. And then there are the neighborhood children. What Ketchum understood, and what makes the book almost unbearable, is the social contagion of cruelty. The kids who participated didn't show up as villains. They showed up as bored teenagers given permission to do something they'd been told was allowed. Everyone else was doing it. The adult in the house approved. Lord of the Flies explored this dynamic on a desert island, safely distant and allegorical. Ketchum puts it on an ordinary Indianapolis street. He's telling us, the island is always closer than we think. Now, here is where we get into the most formally fascinating and most shattering literary choice in the entire book. In a novel full of sustained brutality, Jack Ketchum italicizes exactly one sentence. It is the sentence that describes rape. And those italics do something I've never seen typography do before or since. They don't function as conventional emphasis. They feel like the text itself flinching, like the page refusing to absorb those words in the same ink as everything else. One reader described it perfectly. It's like the book reacted. The physical form of language buckled under the weight of that specific truth. We almost never talk about what formatting itself means in literary criticism. When you italicize something, you create a lean, a pause, a shift in register, a whisper, or a shout. But because Ketchum uses italics nowhere else for emphasis, this single instance can't be read as stylistic habit. It reads as dissociation. The narrator is trying to pass through the worst moment as quickly as possible, rushing past it in a kind of verbal sprint, and the text itself marks the failure of that sprint. You can't sprint through this. You have to stop. You have to look. There is a concept in Holocaust literature, zeugnies, which means testimony or witnessing. Writers like Primo Levi and Elie Wiesel didn't write to entertain. They wrote to transform readers into witnesses, to make sure that what happened could not be forgotten by making it impossible not to feel. Ketchum, working in a very different genre and register, seems to be reaching for the same thing. That italicized sentence is a rupture in the narrative, a place where the story stops performing and simply states, "You are now a witness. You cannot unread this." We live in the golden age of true crime. Podcasts, docuseries, Reddit deep dives, 4-part Netflix specials. We've become experts at discussing atrocity from a comfortable distance, with narrative arcs and episodic cliffhangers and subscription tier early access to the next horrible thing. It's worth asking honestly, is that format a way of processing horror, or a way of managing it so we never actually have to feel it? The Girl Next Door is the opposite of that format. It doesn't manage your response. It collapses the distance. There is no comfort available here. Truman Capote invented a genre within cold blood, blending literary technique with journalism to cover the Clutter family murders. But Capote was criticized for exactly this problem, aestheticizing evil, writing beautiful sentences about terrible acts, finding the elegance in horror. Ketchum makes the opposite choice. The prose in The Girl Next Door is deliberately plain, almost flat. He withholds beauty on purpose. He is refusing to make Sylvia's suffering into art. He's making it into evidence. There's a difference, and Ketchum understood it. We've seen the Turpin case, the Fritzl case, the documented instances of children abused inside ordinary suburban homes while the world moved around them. And every single time we ask the same question, how did no one know? But they did know. The neighbors knew. The kids told their friends. Teachers noticed. Social workers had flags in the file. The system had warnings. The Girl Next Door asks the harder version of that question, not how did no one know, but what does it cost a community, its soul, its coherence, when people who do know still choose to do nothing? Is it ethical to fictionalize this? That's a fair question and one worth sitting with. Some critics argue that any fictionalization risks exploitation, that turning a real girl's suffering into a reading experience is inherently a violation of her. Ketchum's defenders argue the opposite, that sanitizing it, that allowing Sylvia Likens to become an abstraction, a statistic, a trivia question, that is the real disrespect. The book refuses to let her become a footnote. That refusal, however agonizing to sit with, may be the most honest ethical choice available to a novelist. Here's something I bet you didn't know. Jack Ketchum said in multiple interviews that he had to put this manuscript down repeatedly while writing it. He couldn't finish it in one continuous effort. He said, and this is the part that floored me, that he wrote it because he believed the reader's horror was a form of moral proof. If you read this and you still feel sick, still feel outrage, still feel that none of this should have happened, then something important has survived in you. The book was his way of testing whether that thing was still alive in us. And I bet you didn't know this either. The Likens trial was one of the longest and most closely watched in Indiana history at the time. Gertrude Banaszewski was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life. She was paroled in 1985. She died in 1990. Paula Banaszewski was also convicted. Richard Hobbs, one of the neighborhood teenagers who participated directly in the abuse, served less than 2 years in prison. Less than 2 years. Let that land for a moment. That's the legal system's actual assessment of his participation in the death of Sylvia Likens. Here's the detail that Ketchum incorporates into the novel that reframes everything. Near the end of Sylvia's abuse, her captors carved words into her abdomen, a sentence declaring that she was, quote, a prostitute and proud of it. It was an act of erasure, an attempt to rewrite who she was using her own body as the surface, to take a girl and inscribe a lie onto her skin. Ketchum's entire novel, the whole project of it, can be read as a counter-inscription, an act of literary rewriting, a refusal to let that carved lie be the last word about who Sylvia Likens was. So what does it all add up to? Here is my read, after sitting with this book, and this case for longer than is comfortable. The Girl Next Door is a novel about what happens when a community decides, one small, incremental, deniable step at a time, that certain people are outside the circle of moral concern. Sylvia Likens was not failed by one monster. She was failed by an ecosystem of human beings who decided her suffering was tolerable or distant enough, or someone else's problem. The novel makes that process visible, slowly, methodically, irreversibly visible. And that single italicized sentence, that one formal rupture in the text, I think it's the moral core of the whole book. It's the moment where the prose, like David the narrator, like the neighborhood that looked away, can no longer perform normalcy. Language buckles. The page rebels. Ketchum is saying, some things should not be processed smoothly. Some things should not be absorbed cleanly into narrative. Some things should leave a mark on the reader the way they left a mark on the world. Not for cruelty's sake, for witness. Before we close, let's say this clearly and without any literary framing around it. Her name was Sylvia Likens. She was born January 3, 1949. She liked roller skating. She had a sister she loved. She had a future that was taken from her by people who should have protected her and a community that failed to intervene. She was 16 years old. We remember her not through the horror of what she suffered, but through the insistence that her actual life, her personality, her future, her interrupted self mattered. That's what the book is about. That's what this channel is about, the lives underneath the literature. If this changed how you think about what horror fiction is actually for, not escapism, but witness, you'll want to watch our video on Truman Capote's In Cold Blood and the question every crime writer has to answer. Does literary craft honor its subjects, or does it exploit them? It's a conversation we're still having, and we haven't gotten to the end of it yet. We'll see you there.